Hello, welcome back to Interconnects. In this interview, I'm chatting with Andrew Carr. Andrew is the co-founder and chief scientist at Cartwheel AI, which is making 3D characters and rendering movement from text inputs. Previously, he was at OpenAI as a member of technical staff working on Codex, which powered GitHub Copilot, and also at Gretel AI for working in synthetic data and other topics. Andrew also edits the TLDR AI Newsletter, which is extremely popular and is one of my friends who has been discussing kind of how to write in AI, what's happening, and kind of this bird's eye view of the whole ecosystem. We cover kind of the state of the affairs in generative AI and how we can become excited about generative AI through the models kind of just scaling again and again, and what are more creative ways for using these technologies that we're building. Enjoy this conversation with Andrew. Hey, Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this will be fun. I think this is kind of a open-minded discussion relative to some of the interviews that I do. I'm excited to learn about Cartwheel and some of the stuff that you're doing. I appreciate that there's not that many people that feel like they're trying to do something different in generative AI, and I think it marks a good moment to kind of remember what are the interesting, creative, and new things that people are going to be doing. I think yesterday, as of recording, is when Claude released their computer use, which we'll talk about. We've seen OpenAI's O1, which is different but the same. And it's how far can we push generative AI to be truly different, and how much of it is going to be incremental? So I think a good place to start, just to kind of get momentum, is to learn about Cartwheel, the startup that you're making, and you share these fun animations of motion.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to. I think we might go into kind of rants on robotics and motion and RL. Once we start going into this, you're gonna nerd snipe me on this, so we'll get into those too. But it's just what is Cartwheel and why is doing things that are different than just big text models important?
Love that. I'll try to not give the marketing pitch. We're neck deep in pitching this thing to people, so I'll try to give the actual technical version. So Cartwheel is a fully vertically integrated top to bottom AI company that we're building. What that means is we have our own hardware in my basement, and I'll show you during this. We have our own model we've trained, our own data. I've tweeted about this, but we have 70 data labelers labeling motion for us. And then we have a product on the front end. So what we're building is a generative and directable animation tool. So the idea is you want to type something in and get a 3D character performing exactly what you typed in. So it's text to 3D motion is the mapping problem that we're trying to solve. And the goal is, maybe a character animator wants their character to do a dance, and it would take thousands of dollars and 2 weeks of work to get the character performing that dance. And so we can hopefully make that much faster for the artists, and then they can go on to build larger and better productions and so on.
Was this started motivated by kind of these artistic endeavors, or was there something else that made motion the problem of interest?
Yeah, I was at OpenAI working on Codex, which was an early program synthesis, powered Copilot for a while. And we were excited about Copilots. Microsoft is still excited about Copilots. And I thought, gosh, where can I put this amazing program synthesis model that we have? We thought it was amazing. It was 27 on human eval. Claude yesterday has 93.7. So it was not amazing relative to what could happen, but I was still excited. There's a piece of 3D software called Blender, free open source 3D thing. It actually has a Python interpreter inside of it. And so I thought, oh, that might be cool. I wonder if it can write Blender code. So I hooked it all up. I had a little text box in Blender. It was calling out and so on. And I said, hey, do this, do that, whatever. I don't know how to use Blender really well, but it would write the code, it would interpret it, and then the 3D environment would do stuff. It would spawn cubes, it would move them and rotate them and so on. And when I got that working, it was sort of this light bulb moment of, wow, maybe I could actually animate stuff. I don't know how to animate, but wouldn't that be cool? We don't use Blender. We don't use any of that. I mean, it's
Yeah, so
totally a
then
different
why
system
is
now.
this the thing that you're doing? Like, why did you get rid of, or like, what is the coordinate system of your model? Like, why did you get rid of the intermediate renderer? I think there's two things that come to mind. There's like
Yeah.
Common Sense Machines is another startup
Yep.
that's doing like text to world generators, and I had talked to them years ago, and it seemed like they were going down like a bit of more of like a meshes route, which seems very linked to simulation. And when I joined Hugging Face, the first project we were working on was Simulate, which is like it's not supported still. It didn't really get off the ground,
Mm.
but it is like the idea of Pythonic APIs for creating environments for agents based on, I think it was Unity and Godot backend. So there's definitely a lot more people that are doing
Yeah.
3D scene creation based on programmatic
Yep. Yeah.
inputs,
And,
it just
Runway.
seems closer to your story, which is like why.
Absolutely. Runway even did something. They did like program synthesis of JavaScript for video filters. Like if you wanted to make things black and white, and they were like, they had a team doing that. I don't know if that still exists or not, but yeah. So, the first thing is Blender, amazing software, super buggy, crashes all the time, right? So I didn't want to be tied to that. And the second thing is, um, you the Python code just isn't enough to move a character realistically, like with kinematics and at least plausible looking physics. And so, for those number of reasons and the scalability, I wanted to be able to train a model on a novel data type. And I think there's a number of sort of technical reasons that made it hard to do that in Blender. We decided to just go directly to the motion data itself. And the motion data is pretty simple. It's position, rotation, velocity over time for a bunch of joints.
A bunch of
That's all
joints.
it
That
is,
makes
right?
sense. So, like, why is this different than robotic foundation models? So it seems like robotic
Yep.
foundation models are acting in a similar, like,
They
you,
are. I
you
think they
give it
are.
text, and there were probably multiple levels of abstraction. Where I think the
Yeah.
visual language model for robots is like telling it where to go in the world, and we'll talk about pointing as a behavior later. But like, why is this? Like, is this like, are these one of these markets going to grow and absorb the other? Is kind of what
I
I'm wondering.
think so. I would be shocked if there wasn't a huge overlap. There's some nitty gritty differences. Like we don't output torques. The character doesn't have to hold themselves up against gravity. There's no physics involved in what we're doing, and so in some sense, it's easier to do fantastical things. Additionally, like we care about storytelling, right? And so we want the character to be much more emotive, squashing and stretching and unusual proportions and so on. So from that perspective, they're like pretty different. The mesh is deformed and the character is non-volume preserving. Like there's all these different problems. But yes, there is a world where you could drive a robot with like a reaching or like a goal-oriented torque calculation forward kinematics thing based on the synthesized motion from a system like ours. I could see that being very possible.
And like,
Or
where
like
does
use
like
our
Sora or whatever fit in? Like, how bad is Sora at the things that you're trying to do? Or I mean, you probably haven't used Sora, but there's equivalents which should be. I'm sure
yeah.
you look at.
I love the video generation stuff just as an endeavor. I think it's very cool. There's lots of reasons why it's hard. I think the main thing is you can't really edit the output of Sora or some equivalent. You just get all these rendered pixels and good luck if it's not what you want. Right, in our case, it's object oriented. There's actual 3D characters that you could go and raise the arm a little bit, or you could swap the character for a different one, or you could do whatever you want to actually edit the underlying scene.
Are you thinking that you're going to expand into different controllable characters?
That's the hope. Like I would love to do cats and dragons and cars, and a camera is a character, so control the camera. We're doing humanoids for now, and we can do a whole wide range of humanoids. But yeah,
Because
why
this
not?
is like
Anything that moves.
this is like the story in robotics, which is going from training on one robot to training on multiple robots, and you're operating at a different abstraction, and like your state spaces are the same. So you're kind of arguing that the generalization will be similar. I think it's a bit more open ended than robotics, or maybe less interactive. But like, do you think that you're gonna hit this if you're trying to generalize this? Do you think you're gonna hit the same barriers that places like physically intelligent are when they try to do this, or it might be like the digital is the thing that's saving you?
Yeah, because we don't have to do any sim to real physical plausibility. You know, just just canceling out getting a neutral dynamical system in this over-actuated world where a robot can stand, right? That's really hard to do, and our character stands for free, right? And so I think that because it is digital and because it's performative, right, it just has to look good. It doesn't have to have plausible torques. I think we have a lot of benefits there.
I think that's kind of what I would expect. That's a good. Are there any other generalizations where you see this trade-off in the whole generative AI space? I think it's like, how does a computer agent fall in? So like a computer agent is all digital, but it's like still interacting with the world that it doesn't fully model. Like Claude doesn't control the computer. Like, is it going to be able to recover when Finder crashes on my Mac randomly because there's too many tabs open? Is there I'm just wondering
Yeah.
where this extends to, because I do think that generative AI is at its best in fully digital domains. That's why like text works, and coding is also like text, but I don't know if any of these as
Yeah.
we go towards self-driving cars, it's like or robotics.
It's a good question, right? I think so. There's two axes I think about. One is the editability. Can you do you physically or digitally have the ability to recover from errors? Can you edit the underlying thing? And then two is this sort of grounded versus non-grounded nature of interaction. So I think Claude can edit the text, it can click on websites, it can do all of those things. So I think that is fine. Then the grounded question is, do I believe that Claude will be able to succeed without a full world model?
Like this is the bet that people are making. Like to what
Yeah.
extent can AI operate in the world? Like the AIs that we're using today operate in worlds that are not constrained. And I think that's like the most, I think AGI definitions are pretty silly, but most of the ones that are exciting hinge on whether or not the AI can actually do things outside of its training domain. It's like, can it interact and can it handle these things? And for now, it's like, seems like the right thing to do is to build a business that doesn't rely on this because there's so
Right.
much to do.
Yeah. And that's what we've done. I think to your point, I think what will likely happen is the training domain will expand to include most useful things you can do on a computer. And then it doesn't matter that the machine is still just interpolating its training data. It will be doing whatever we think it needs to be doing, ordering food and whatever thing.
Like is yeah, so I see most of this being that generative AI just does our simple things in the background, which is just sort of saving us time and is not
Yeah.
necessarily like, I guess like coding is a big unblocker, but to do truly new things is hard. I think I still have mental block on the real world SWE bench like things where
I tend to agree.
people say in the labs that they're using these to dramatically increase the pace of AI research. But what
Yeah, I
does
mean,
that look like?
O1, from what they say, has authored PRs to the OpenAI code base, which is cool. I have
Really?
no idea what those look like. Like,
That's,
are those
at the
version
same
bumps?
time, it's like most open source commits are typo fixes because
Yeah.
people want to be listed on a contributor. Like, yeah, that's well and fine, and I suspect it can do this, but I don't think it's probably actually doing the really hard things without handholding. Like, you can handhold the AI
Yeah.
models to do this.
Yeah.
So that's like that's what I'm trying to figure out is what extent is small vertical companies the only way forward versus these models actually generating new and useful things.
Yeah, I'm extremely biased. I think small vertical companies are going to be really valuable, sort of have an outsized impact in the new world for a whole pile of reasons. Like, we use language models for all kinds of small things internally that would be a whole person's job. Um, and then our tool is hopefully going to empower creators to create much more fantastic stories in their day jobs, right, over time. We'll see.
Are there other domains that you think people are sleeping on? It's like you think about this a lot. I mean, you had this tweet that was like, I spend a large amount of time exploring which models are best for poetry. And
Yeah,
like why is that? Is that related or is that just like
totally unrelated. I run a number of anonymous poetry Instagram channels. which are really fun.
Are they anime profile pictures?
No, I mean it's all on Instagram, right? And that would be fun. I do not have an anonymous Twitter account for those wondering. I am not one
I
of.
have an anonymous account with less than 10 followers because I'm too lazy to use it.
It happens. No, I mean I think poetry is fascinating. It's a really good playground for a few things, right? Instruction following, world knowledge, and then some sort of hints of creativity, and that it's hard to actually define a domain where those three coincide and converge. And so it's really, I have a set of 100 or so different poetry tasks that it's like very clear to me when a model is good.
Do you think these models are better, like are good in the way that humans are good at poetry? Like, what do you mean by good for AI writing poetry?
Yeah, so I have in I've haven't played with these full time, but in the hundreds of hours I've spent on poetry models.
I mean, that's like way more than the vast majority of people.
I would think so, right? I have generated or had generated 3 poems that I would consider like masterpiece in the states that they were moving to me and they were beautiful and I felt really compelled to share. So 3 out of however many poems I've generated, thousands and thousands. So from that perspective, like no, they're not close to people. People write much better poetry. I think people are far more creative and moving and whatever. But it's there, like it's in there.
Is there any way to detect that a certain poem is a masterpiece without just having a highly educated human look at them?
I haven't found a great one yet. I've done some LLMs as judges, and I've tried to enumerate like all the criteria. So I really love the self-rewarding language models paper where they do the additive like 5-point scale. I use that everywhere. And so I have an additive 5-point scale that tries to get tone and musicality and like different poetic devices and then like subject relative to the things that are included. But that relies on the model itself having the same world knowledge and all the LLM as judges problems that you run into.
This is one of the like common threads that I'm seeing is which domains can we translate into a verifiable reward. So in math, It's the way that you look at math problems these days. It's like, can the language models generate the answer in the distribution of the problem? And in our poetry analogy is that yes, it can generate the answer. But why math is nice is because once you can generate the answer, you then have a signal that you can use to train the model. But with poetry, we don't have the signals by which we can train the model. So I don't expect like poetry to dramatically change. Like it'll be easier to generate a masterpiece poem, but the human supervision is still the bottleneck because it would have to get so much better that every single poem is a masterpiece. I think that is
that's
not
right.
something
And like
I would bet on.
This is what I was alluding to in my tweet where I said like scale doesn't help much with poetry is essentially this point of because we don't have direct supervision, because we don't have good measures of this, just making the model much bigger won't make every poem a masterpiece.
So will we be able to make masterpieces in motion? Like in robotics, you have supervision, which is if the task is completed. But in art and like this kind of cinematic motion, the supervision I think is human preferences.
Yeah, we don't break away from human preference. You can still train an aesthetics classifier like you would in images. All these video models now use aesthetics classifiers also. You can do the same thing in motion.
I just like the robotics analogies because on the one hand we said that robotics will be a lot harder because it has to deal with sim to real, but on the other hand we said that it has a signal that we have shown again and again that is extremely powerful for these models. Yeah. So it's like harder and easier.
Well, I mean, I love that point. It's never been the case that the software was the hard part in the last 5 years for robotics. Like with these language models, we can plan and reason well enough that robots are fine. It's really just hardware reliability, which is why I think people are sleeping on Optimus as like a robotics solution because their hardware, I mean, they've amazing, so fast, gotten to such a powerful, and it's teleoperated, whatever, it doesn't matter. But like the software is not too bad after that. I could be naive, famous last words, but
I kind of want to have Sergey on the show. He's very good at selling these things. I think that I've talked with him a good amount about this at like Physically Intelligence office, and it's just like, how do you get these robots into the world? Like, I don't want. Who's going to pay 10 grand for a hunk of potatoes that is not doing anything? And it's just like, if you can get the flywheel going, I think like we've seen with Waymo, the flywheel is going there. It took them 10 years to get the flywheel going in a real way. It's like,
Yeah.
if you could do this for home robotics, like, sure, you'll have the data, but all the data is going to be in warehouses. It's like, how do you get, like, I ask, it's things like, how you're going to give robots to academics and like let them collect data that you use for free? Like, is that even enough? It just seems like
Yeah.
it's a grand problem that will work at some point in the next 100 years, I think. But I feel like most of the predicting is just kind of these weird socio-cultural dynamics and economies of scale and making them really cheap, which I don't want to bet my career on, but I understand why people want to do it.
That's right. Yeah, and it's more promising than it's ever been, given this rise in, control theory is much more well understood, and we have stronger processing, better batteries. But yeah, it does feel hard. Data's still the bottleneck. And there's, simulators are getting better. And a lot of people are excited about video models because they can potentially simulate a robot in a home. There's been some work by 1X, I think, did their video model. I can't remember now, but
Yeah, and then we've also seen like Waze had a really state-of-the-art video model before just for car simulating.
yep.
So I think these things are related. It's like almost like they'll use Cartwheels. Like Cartwheel is building a very dedicated, like an engine for some of these domains.
I think that's true. Like, it would not surprise me if people use the Cartwheel API to generate great training data for some niche thing. Sure. Like, that's great. And then you do sums into real sum goodness, a little bit of physics, and you're you're in business.
Yeah. Okay. Let's continue on to more focused on the Claude computer thing.
Sure.
I wrote about this because it was easier than I expected to run. Anthropic has a documentation where you just run one Docker command and it shows up. And I tried things and it was not like it's obvious that it's the future. It's fun that we have so many. I'm also working on a piece that's like, it's just so fun to have so many of these moments where the future is obviously here in a short period of time.
Yeah.
It's like the Meta RayBans are like, oh, these are like AirPods again, which is awesome, but in a different, exciting way. SpaceX landing giant rockets, riding Waymo, I did for the first time a few years ago.
Yep.
ChatGPT, like Claude agent, like all of these things are like immediately and viscerally like this is something that will be here. And
Notebook LM, I would actually put in that bucket as well.
Yeah, for a lot of people. And I was like, oh, Notebook LM is kind of weird, but it is a new form factor. That's awesome. And it's just like so good to live in these things. But at the same time, it's like the path ahead for Claude almost feels harder than other things, just because like you have to get Apple to let you have to use the Apple accessibility features, or Apple's going to launch first party things. There's so much money going into agents, and I don't know if this is why like GPT-5 isn't released. It's like it's been hyped up for so long.
Yeah.
What do you think about this space? Like, why didn't Adept get here? This is what I asked you before, and you had two good points on like why Adept might not have worked.
Yeah, Adept had the talent, right? And they didn't raise near enough, right? Anthropic has outraised them by 10x. And so like maybe that's part of it. They just needed more time and compute. But I think two hard things, right? One is counting pixels, like knowing where to click. That just turns out to be really, really hard to do.
It's like AI2 did it with Molmo, and I think it was just by getting a whole bunch of human annotations.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think for the things that you can get annotations for, it works really well. I don't know a lot about the benchmarks in this space, but the Claude model, right, got 16 something percent on Agent Bench, or I don't even know which one it is.
Yeah, these benchmarks are so uninterpretable in my brain. It got high scores with a simpler,
but like the
simpler agent approach.
Yeah, the human on that benchmark was like 77%, and so I don't know what the problem is. Like long context, I think is maybe the other thing that breaks down.
You can see this when using it because it becomes pretty slow, because what it's doing is it's sending 10 images per action back to the Claude API, which burns through tokens super fast. And then you like send 10 images and it's like, click on the window. And I'm like, I think I could have trained a local model to tell me to like press the down key when it's trying to scroll down or something. So it's just like, but Anthropic launching it now is also weird. And it's I
It's hard
just
to
find
know.
the whole thing kind of baffling because on the one hand, it's so obvious and it's good that it still feels good when it's been hyped up, but it's like where like it's gonna take a long time.
It's gonna take a long time. Yeah, I totally agree. And like, I mean, if we look at the mathematical and code reasoning abilities of Claude, which are a proxy for planning, they're good. Like they've saturated a lot of these benchmarks as good as you can get, I think, for most.
Why do you say it's a proxy for planning? And like, what do you mean that planning for a language model is?
Yeah, so I'm talking specifically about like which things we have to click on and what I have to do next. This is like old research, but when instruction tuning was coming around and people were excited about it, we found that training on code improved like instruction following. And so since we don't have amazing instruction following benchmarks that are not hyper niche, like I look at code and I look at math as like a hazy proxy for a model's ability to follow instructions and then generate the instructions for itself to follow, which I think are critical for clicking on things on the web.
Yeah, I just think the big problem with it is always doing one action at a time. And it's just so slow to have it think about the current image and then you take one action. At least for a model of this size that's just so big. It just ends
Did
up being
didn't DeepMind train a image to clicking model on Android like 3 years ago?
yeah, there's a whole baseline that's like Android world or something.
Yeah,
Ultimately, AI 2 is wanting to build an open source version of this, so I have thoughts swirling, but I just still am kind of like it's hard to find a hill to climb on in agents. It's
yeah.
more of like I just want to set the stakes in a simpler way and don't actually have expectations for how good it is.
Yep, I could see that. I mean,
And
my big use case is I just want it to be able to do something that I've done in the browser. Like that's all I
yeah,
want. I want
that's why I
better
was like,
RPA.
send me an email, and it was like I figured it out, but I'm Claude and I can't do personal communications, and I was like, great, like cool.
I know.
That's why it's like it doesn't feel like Claude people or Anthropic wants people to actually use this. It's like a cool
Yeah,
demo that is
there's a
hard to
great
get
thread
working.
by Near about getting it to order them lunch, which I thought was pretty compelling. Like took hundreds of thousands of tokens to order lunch and finally got it done.
In some ways, this launch feels like OpenAI's O1. Like, why did OpenAI launch O1 when they did? It felt rushed. Well, it is rushed in some way because the final model wasn't done yet.
Yep.
It's similar. I think it's trying to push, like, this is pushing the frontier on tool use and multi-turn and image, but O1 is like fully on the intelligence quotes side of
Yeah,
things.
I have some loosely held opinions there. Um, I think internally at OpenAI, people have really latched on to the low key research preview idea. Like they found that to be immensely successful with ChatGPT. And for listeners who don't know, ChatGPT was released as what was called internally a low key research preview, which essentially means no one expected it to blow up, but now it's like changed the world. And I think
Low
internally,
key research preview is just so funny in the context of like the company that is colloquially understood as to mean AI now. It's like
yeah,
there's nothing that they can release that is low key. It is the
it's
burden that
true.
they hold.
It's true, but I don't think that's help. I don't think that mindset is embraced internally. Like they really believe that low key research previews are the way, um, and so from that perspective, O1 makes perfect sense. Just hey, it's halfway done, but look how cool it is, and we worked really hard on it and solved some hard problems. And that feels very in line with my mental model of the OpenAI science teams.
Interesting. Yeah, so I know that there's this. It was what is I don't know the first name, but Chen or like and maybe Andrew Chen was leading this like frontiers team, and that's where most of these things come from.
Yeah.
And
So Mark Chen was doing work
yeah,
there. He led the Codex work too. Yeah.
yeah, it's like Codex, code interpreter. I mean, code interpreter is amazing. There's this
Yep.
advanced data analysis thing.
Same
And
team for what it's worth.
yeah,
That did
yeah,
O1.
it's all
Yeah,
the
that's all
same
been.
team.
Yeah.
And just like OpenAI is experimenting, which is why I would expect this sort of thing to come from them rather than Anthropic.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I mean, we can think a little bit about company cultures and whatever, but at the end of the day, we're living in the future, and so it's cool for me. Like I agree with you completely. What you said earlier, like that resonates strongly with. I just get so excited when new models come out, and I get so excited when new capabilities are released, and I don't use half of them, or even 10, 20, less than 10%. But it's just it's exciting.
I was considering asking this as someone that's been in these labs before ChatGPT is like, what makes a successful AI culture? I'm coming up on a year at AI 2, and I'm kind of thinking about like I have influence on the AI 2's culture, and it's visibly less than I may expect, but realistically, that's all you do is you individuals shift very subtly kind of long-standing culture. And OpenAI has been the one that people talk about the most. So, like, what do you view as the most successful things to actually building AI that matters and differentiating that from building like with AI in a way that matters?
Yeah, this is great. So I actually took copious notes while at OpenAI. I was intending to write a book on their research culture, never got around to it, but I try to
If you
implement
can
a lot
make
of
it a
that here.
blog post, Bill,
I
people would
should.
love
That's
it.
what I should do.
Books are overrated.
Books, yeah, that is not wrong. I try to implement a lot of this at Cartwheel, although we're much smaller. There's a few things that matter, and these are all going to probably sound obvious, but they have to be internalized by the scientists.
I think they sound
So
obvious, but they're hard to implement, is the
they're
thing.
super hard to implement, right? So we'll maybe state them first and then talk about ways to implement. So the first thing is simplicity is the only thing that matters. What I mean by that is, we care about scale at OpenAI. They cared about like being able to build on top of other people's work. And so it has to be the simplest thing. So hacks are not allowed. You cannot hack things in. It has to be true to some sense, right? Okay. And then the next thing is ownership. So each scientist is responsible for a thing, right? And you're going to say a piece of truth about the problem. Like the model responds to learning rate in this way, and here's my graph. And there's no time for people to double check. And so it has to be correct, and people have to trust you in that. So, you have heated discussions.
Yeah. How many of these are you going to go through?
One more.
Okay, let's finish the list and then discuss.
Yeah. So anyway, you have to trust. And then the third one, let's see if I can. Oh, the third one was autonomy. So teams are very amorphous at OpenAI. You can stand up teams if you want, and then teams disperse and go and work on other things, and it's sort of this flat hierarchy. So those are the three that I observed as the main drivers.
To repeat, you said simplicity, ownership, and autonomy are three important things. And I think different companies get stuck on different ones. I think AI2 as a research culture gets the most stuck on, I mean, like being a research culture gives you a boost of autonomy and at a cost of simplicity. So managing or like getting ready to release our big like next post training project, and it's such a lesson on like how to manage 10 to 15 people that are almost all researchers, and it's like simplicity is impossible, along with control. So there's no controlling researchers, and I bet OpenAI struggles with this in some domain. I think they're probably better at it because you're getting $1 million because you're there for a reason. You're not free to go do everything else.
That's right.
But like getting people to embrace simplicity, I think is hard and goes against some cultures.
Yeah, it goes against how we were brought up in academia, right? You're rewarded on novelty, not simplicity. And so, but like novelty doesn't matter actually for most things. What matters is truth and simplicity. Like OpenAI cares so deeply about the like minimum description length principle as this guiding idea. Ilya preset all the time of intelligence will be the simplest thing, and what have you. So I don't know if that's true or not, but
yeah, I think that it's like this simplicity is kind of a cultural thing, and then ownership is more on just finding talent. I think increasingly in the open, I feel like there's just so few people that do all the work. It's like the crazy things that the few of us deal with at AI2 is just like we try to do everything because it matters, and it's like not everyone. You have to be capable of holding a lot in your head and doing it to take ownership of like a few things and go really deep, and that's just like what the best people are able to hold more in their head. And then
It's
autonomy,
super
I think,
hard.
is also autonomy is almost like a team structure thing, which is almost like why Google could be ordering so many times. It's like if you just have too many managers, it's not like the people are not going to feel like they have the ability to impact it.
Yeah. Yeah, there are far more tech leads than managers at OpenAI. At least there was when I was there. I mean, it's a very different company now. Um, almost 10x the size as when I was there.
Yeah, yeah. I just try to spend time understanding these like frontier lab cultures because it's very insular as well. Because all the people at OpenAI and Google and Meta that are like deep leads, like they all talk to each other, which is just so funny. They all like probably know what they're doing, and like
Yep.
all these free training people are just trying to make their stuff better, and it's so funny while the companies are pitted against each other. Most of them are just friends.
Yeah, and well, and the reality of the innovations is that like, oh, I was able to get a better way to filter the data at scale, and now it's a little bit faster, and I can try two more experiments. Like that's where the innovation comes from, and that's fine, and I actually really like that. But when you see that as a scientist, it's like not inspiring for a lot of people to go do that kind of work.
Yeah, I describe it as white rice research. It's just like we're trying to do the boring things for a few years to make sure that the ecosystem is okay. But we need to do this to have cred to then go do more fun things once everything is kind of stabilized. We don't know how
Yeah,
long it's going to be going for. Like it's going to be
that's right.
obvious when you no longer need to do the boring thing, but it doesn't feel close to it.
Right, and I preach that so hard here at Cartwheel to the scientists who want to join the team. I'm like, you will be looking at lots of data, and you will be like making sure it's easy to look at lots of data. Like that's your job because that's the only thing that matters. Like we have a transformer, we have a couple of things like we're not going to innovate on those because that's not going to change, but increasing data quality by 2x will make or break the company.
Yeah, it's like the things that you use the most are like Hugging Face dataset viewer and then little utilities for
Yeah,
because
we
Hugging Face doesn't handle the multi-turn format if you're doing and it doesn't handle like pre-training documents well. So you need tools to skim pre-training documents and you need tools to handle like post-training data, which is all in this like list of turns thing
yeah.
with chosen and rejected. It's like those are the like I guess Hugging Face maybe if you're listening can make those easier. We
Yeah,
don't
I
need them.
that's one thing I have added to our culture, which is we are tool builders, meaning we build those tools for the scientist next to you. And so we have this thing called DATAP, which stands for data pipeline. And it's just like it does all kinds of goodness for us. And there's like 50 small utilities in DATAP that we love to use. And like, yeah, it's the way to go. It's the way to go.
Related to culture, as a co-founder, why do you spend a lot of time writing and editing a newsletter? Like, what do you get out of this?
Yeah, so I write TLDR AI, co-write that with a couple folks. I get a few things. One, I'm just like a very prideful person. And you and I have talked about this, offline a number of times. I care a lot about brand and recognition. And so TLDR gets me that while no one has heard about Cartwheel. So, I have this
Well,
personal value.
it's a mechanism to help people hear about Cartwheel.
And then that's the second one, right? It's really good free advertising whenever we have something I want to share, which I don't do that often, but like, we can plug it in there. But then third, my job title is technically chief scientist at Cartwheel. And as such, I feel very strongly that I need to just know what's going on. So, you do really amazing summaries. This is my way it's a forcing function for me to just read everything that there is, all of the GitHub repos, try all the models, look at all the releases, so that I know. And it's great. I mean, we pull in the bleeding edge all the time, and it's been very good for Cartwheel to have me doing that. But it's a lot of time. I mean, I spend several hours a week on it.
I mean, I obviously do this too, and I have these monthly write-ups of open models and data sets, and when I'm doing these, it's almost always like, oh, I think this person might be interested in this. It's like we're using Tencent's like personas method a lot right now, and I was like, oh, there's
Mm.
another set of personas that has a better license. It's like maybe we use that one, and it's like it it's hard to know when these things add up, but also I don't know if it's like why does it benefit to have a technical person doing this and not just somebody that like looks for interesting words? I feel like you can't just outsource it, but it seems like on paper that you could. It also seems like on paper that you could potentially have somebody just write taglines, because you look at your audience for TLDR AI, it's random normal tech people
That's
that are
right.
clicking on a couple things. And like,
That's right.
is there
They want the
something
highest
different
level.
about AI that makes it so that the like technical writing in the eye is still so much more valuable?
I've never thought about that. I always tell people that most of what I read is noise, and there's like very little signal in there, but they all have the same words, and so it's. I agree. It's like hard. It's hard for me to imagine even getting a super smart person who's non-technical to like without 6 or 8 months of work get up to speed.
Yeah, I mean, this is just something I spend a lot of time on because distribution is changing so much. I think
Yeah.
I primarily wonder from the scientist and then what the change of distribution is doing to science, but it goes all the way up the stack to just people's jobs. And well, I say it in most of these podcasts because it's people that I am bringing on normally have some level of distribution. There's people that
Yeah.
don't have that and are just prolific scientists, but it's normally easier when you have this ability
So much
to
easier.
read, and it's almost like training your own information processing. It just
Yeah.
is like,
Yeah. And like, I'm much better now at skimming papers and determining if there's nuggets in there. And so, when I tweet about papers that I'm excited about, it's mostly because the nugget to non-nugget ratio is quite high. So like the Meta Movie Gen paper, for example, is one of the best papers I've read in the last 6 months. And like I don't do a lot of RLHF and preference stuff, so I miss a lot of those good papers. But there's just like piles of great things in the Meta Movie Gen paper that could easily be ported to almost any other creative project today and would make things better. Right?
what do you think the role, like, how do you identify a good technical report? Is it just obvious? I mean, like, I have said that like the Llama 3 technical report has brought open models ahead by X months, which I
Yep,
believe, but still it is missing a lot of details.
that's right.
And the director's cut title of the paper that we're going to hopefully release in like a month is like the missing details in the Llama 3
Nice.
post-training paper. And
Yep.
it's like it's remarkable how little is shared, but still what is shared is still useful.
Yeah, I think so. It's incremental, right? The papers that get published are on 2-year-old pipelines for the most part. And so what we saw in
Why do you
the
say
Llama
this?
paper, what was that?
Why do you say 2-year-old pipelines?
Well, I'm saying because yeah, let me frame my thoughts. So it used to be the case that pre-training was where there was all the alpha, and the Llama paper has lots of good tidbits on pre-training data filtering and that sort of thing. Now, however, the alpha is actually in post-training, not a lot of good tidbits in the meta paper on post-training, right? And
Is
so
that just because we're waiting on scaling? Like, does this cycle with the model versions?
I think so, right? So I think in a year we'll have amazing post-training recipes from closed labs, like as papers. I believe that to be true.
Because do you think that's because like GPT-5 will be so much better that they just have the moat because only two people can do it?
That's what happened historically, and so yes, if that's what happens, that will be the reason, in my opinion.
Interesting. Yeah, I hope so. I hope they continue to care.
I hope
I
so
do
too.
think that the time lag to build the next cluster is why post training has had such an opportunity, and they
Interesting.
have found hills to climb on it. This chatbot arena plot is so wild, where it was like incremental, 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 and then OpenAI like figured something out, and like they just started hill climbing on chatbot arena,
Yeah,
and it's just like that is some weird post training thing, and I don't think it is really something that academics can follow. Like we don't have evaluations to hill climb on that. We can send models to chatbot arena, but it's clear by how direct, like monotonically and fast the progress is that OpenAI is like explicitly training for that sort of thing, which is a
yep,
divergence that was bound to happen if there's hundreds of millions of users of AI. Those models are going to become very different than the models that AI2 is releasing.
that's right. Yeah, that's right, and um, different in many ways that consumers like, but may not be useful to like the broader AGI goals and missions.
Okay, another fun one. I mentioned these earlier. You said that you're a Meta RayBans user.
Yes,
I
it's my
also
favorite
have
gadget.
some. what do you use them for? And then we'll talk about AI devices.
Yeah, so I have long been awaiting glasses that are good, sunglasses. Um, the there's lots of hardware reasons that they're good. You know, the speakers are really nice. The camera's as good as, if not better than my phone. It's very convenient. Like we were at the theme park yesterday. I have a 3-year-old son, and I could just like walk behind him and like take a little picture while he's doing something fun. And so I get to capture all these moments. And like as a father, I love that. But then I also like talk to, Llama. I think they have Llama 7DB serving that API. But I can ask it basic questions. And so, and I can see the hints, right? Really, what it is, I can see the future here. Like if they have advanced voice mode, which I actually also love,
They
in my
are building something. It's just not in the
they are,
classes yet.
yeah, they're building a whole team out in London to do it. They have, yeah, they're like doing, Spirit LM is suggestive that they've got this speech to speech thing on lock. Anyway, the point being, like, I could absolutely see myself having really amazing conversations about just like stuff that I would think about,
Have you
history,
tried
economics.
advanced voice mode?
I have, yeah.
Do you use it? I was kind of like, this is odd. Maybe I kind of was like, this might just not be for me.
It's super odd because most AI is really good for coding, and it is not at all good for coding. It's like a very different thing. So I use it to do guided breath work, like stretching. I use it to talk about famous figures in history. It's really good for me to like figure out, there's lots of conflicts going on in the world that I don't know much about, but it's really good for me to just like talk to it and say, get me up to speed
Like,
because I
how
have
do you
no idea
break the
what's going on.
barrier? So you're just like leaned in and tried a bunch of things. I'm guessing there's
Yeah.
a lot of things that don't work on it. I just feel like picking it up was like, oh, this is too uncanny valley
Hard.
for me to like lean into.
Yeah, it's super weird. So I started out poking the boundaries of what the voice itself could do. So I'm like, speak in Japanese with a cowboy accent. Like, can you do that? I know some Japanese, and so it's like fun. I did that with
Yeah.
my family. But then I was like, oh, tell me about historical Japanese quotes, like phrases that are integrated into society in Japan. Amazing. It did like incredible job outlining all these things. I'm like, oh, okay. It seems like it actually really understands peoples and cultures. So then I like went to history. So it
So this
was,
is good. I feel like it's surprising to me because I am a very auditory person. Like I listen to a lot of media, and that's why I like do things like narrate my own blogs and stuff. That's why I was like,
yeah,
it's like it almost like is it actually a red flag that I can't use it, or like just didn't latch on? And are you a Ben Thompson reader? Because he's another person that's like this is obviously the future, and
yeah,
I can feel that when wearing the Ray-Bans. I just think that the AI thing is very unproven. And I do think the
yeah,
agent stuff would be better. Like I think that Meta AI is like more constrained than Siri, but arguably does all the same things I already do with Siri, which is
yep,
remarkable that it's doing it in a sandboxed app. So
yep.
it's like clearly there's signs of life there if we put up with Siri.
That's exactly right. I mean, I can see, yeah, I came to the same conclusion. I can ask it to do stuff and it'll say, oh, I can't do that right now for these reasons. Like it can reason about, well, not reason, but like it's very clear it can communicate what it can and cannot do, which Siri, I mean, just never is going to do, right? Never can
Well,
do
we'll
that.
see. Apple Intelligence wasn't it supposed to come out in 2 days?
We'll see. We'll see. I mean, I'm not an
just,
iPhone user, but
just the
maybe I'll put
future.
on my card. But like I could feel, that they had just done length constrained tuning on Llama to make it only respond in really short snippets and then have like a really constrained system prompt. Like that's what it feels like when I talk to it. And so I'm like, oh, well, those are fake. Those are like fake limitations. And so imagine throwing those away. It can do everything that I do with Claude, in 2 years. Gosh, how cool is that? Like I'm working in the garden. I'm like, oh, is this a weed? Or okay, great. Or like, oh man, how much do I need to water more? Or whatever. But like, you're right. It's not a coding tool, and I don't think it ever will be.
I'm trying to balance how much of this is an AI story, or is it just like AI gave it enough momentum to make people reconsider it? Because I think the form factor of the glasses would be fine with and without AI. Given that I use AirPods a lot, I understand why these would be just like an AirPods plus plus for me. And the AI makes it much harder to forecast. Or like I'm trying to disambiguate the AI ness from the other stuff.
Yeah. So I don't think people are adopting it today for the AI. I think that is true. Like I love the camera. That's what I opened with: the camera and the audio and the
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah, this is what everyone does. This is what I do. I have a draft written on it, and I have the same stuff, which is why it's just like we're saying that AI is driving the future, and generative AI is what everyone points at. But it's like maybe a little bit more messy. It's like
Yeah,
Waymo isn't about generative AI, but it's one of my favorite technology experiences. And it's
yeah,
like these things, it's weird that they're all at the same time.
yeah. I mean, well, and you and I both know pretty strongly that like it's actually compute plus data plus deep learning that makes a lot of these things work. And like there's all kinds of great stuff in the auditory system of the glasses that are probably driven by some little network in there. Waymo's full of little networks. But yeah, that's a good point.
That's why I'm kind of like, I don't know exactly. I think it'll look in the past, and we will look back at this as all being an AI story, at least for the glasses, because what you have said is very obvious. But it
Yeah,
is just kind of funny to live through it and be like, oh, some of these things are a little out of order, but that is given Meta an advantage.
yeah, and there's a business story here. Like they're trying to find their platform on which to own and dominate because they feel beholden to the existing platforms. And so it could be platform first and then the usability. Hard to say. That's
Do you think
pretty far
Llama is a
outside of my.
platform? What do you think about the whole Llama strategy?
Yeah, I right. So as I understand it, they released all this stuff to say make our open source ecosystem so much better, so that we can then like bring stuff back in. So this was PyTorch, React. They've done this all over. Um, it feels a little bit different because in theory, like anyone who's good at coding could write a React alternative. Um, but no one who's good at coding could like train a Llama alternative without substantial capital investments. So it's
Yeah,
different.
yeah,
And in as much as progress is driven by access to GPUs, the community is not going to make these better for Meta. Like they're going to make it better for themselves. But it's so cheap for them to say, what if some crazy academic comes up with some amazing thing? Like, maybe this entropic sampling thing that's going around, like, is that thing? And it's only good enough because Llama's good enough. Like, maybe. So it feels sort of like a shotgun just in case approach, but like they don't need it. I think it's not, they don't need us to make Llama better.
yeah. The whole developer ecosystem for AI seems extremely or just not locked in. I think it's like Anthropic's API numbers are very similar to OpenAI. Llama has this whole thing where they're trying to make the Llama models default, which converges a bit where people train similar model sizes to Llama. And there's reasons why those model sizes exist based on like how big a H100 node is and all these things. So there's like very structural reasons why they exist. And we'll see where it goes. I just like Meta's its own thing. There's the whole academic side of things, which is separate, but honestly helped
Yeah.
by Meta. Like it helps all of the truly open stuff a lot to have
Yeah.
Meta's models around, even if the license is weird. It's just
Right.
kind of a guiding star. So there's a lot of
Yeah, I think that's
discussion.
true. And like, they're trying to release code bases, Lingua, Torch Titan, Torch Chat. Like these are all attempts, I think, to extend an olive leaf, maybe, I don't know, to like the academic community and get feedback, but early days, pretty early days.
Yeah, this seems good to me. Anything else you want to add?
No, I mean, I love AI. Sign up for the beta at Cartwheel. I don't know what am I supposed to plug.
No, that's fine. I think that makes sense.
Cool,
It
man.
was nice to talk to you, and
Yep,
thanks for
great to
coming
catch up.
on.
Yep.
Bye bye.